Hi, this is Dan Matson. Please note this podcast was created several years ago. Some of the links, email addresses, phone numbers, and promos are outdated and no longer valid. Thanks and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats, weekly podcast episode number 120. I'm your host, Dan Matson, aka Wooden Boat Dan, and this is the world's first podcast fully dedicated to celebrating the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance of wooden vessels around the world. Thanks for listening today, folks. I appreciate you being on board with the Hooked on Wooden Boat ship. We did reach a milestone this week. Pretty cool. We now have officially over 100,000 downloads of this podcast since I started in September of 2011. So that's pretty amazing. 100,000 downloads. If everybody listened to every episode, that would be, 10,000 people or 1,000 people listening to them all, or whatever the numbers are. But anyway, that's a big milestone, so I'm pretty happy about that. Of course, that wouldn't be possible without you listening, so thanks again for tuning in. Today's featured segment is an interview I did with Eric Hvalsoe. Eric has been in the Seattle area for a long time. He actually lives in Shoreline, and Eric attended boat building school early and then started his career as a shipwright building and designing boats. And he's actually got a couple of very famous designs, the Hvalsoe 13 and the Hvalsoe 16, which are lapstrake boats that row and sail well, and they're very beautiful boats too. So stick around for that interview with Eric. I think you're going to enjoy it. As far as news and highlights this week, I've been working on, in the wooden boat world that is, I've been working on converting my ebook, A Guide to Building Your First Boat, Get in the Wooden Boat Game, A Guide for Building Your First Boat. I've been working on converting that to a Kindle book, so it's available on Amazon. And converting to a Kindle from a Microsoft Word document that you've designed for an ebook is actually a fairly involved process, I'm finding out. But I really want to get it done and get my book on the Kindle. And then my next goal will be to actually self-publish the book, so it'd be available as a hardback book on Amazon, not hardback, but a paperback book on Amazon, also through their, I think it's called the Create Space program. So I want to get the word out more about the book because I think it is a good book. And if you have an interest in that book and you're thinking about building your first boat, you can go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/ebook1. So I've got the Scamp sitting in my garage that I bought on December 27th. And as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, I'm getting my shop reorganized. I actually added a portable heater, which will heat my space of 450 square feet. And I had to, hang on a second, I'm going to turn my heater off in the background here. And so I had to install a new 240 volt, I thought 20 amp circuit for my table saw, but the table saw actually requires a 30 amp circuit to start it because it's an older saw. It's a Delta Unisaw, which I really love. So I got that done, and then I had an electrician friend of mine come over and check my wiring to make sure it was all safe and proper, and he did that yesterday. So now I got a few little things to do, and then I'm going to take the Scamp off the trailer and get going on her. I'm pretty excited about that, especially now that I've got some heat, so I can keep my garage, closer to 60 degrees than 45 to 50, which gets a little chilly for me. I don't know. Some of you guys out there listening are used to working at those temperatures, but, well, it's especially for if you're working with epoxy, which I will be, you need a little bit warmer than that. So anyway, that's what I'm up to there. Got some new subscribers to the electronic newsletter this week. Stephen Clark, Brycon Smith, Rodney Hughes, Gary Moriarty, Vic McDonough, and Bob Sorsey. Thanks for subscribing to the newsletter, guys. If you haven't subscribed yet, I would encourage you to do so. You can go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. It's a free newsletter that I send out monthly, And I give you a little update on what's happening at Hooked on Wooden Boats. Sometimes I include links to videos and other fun resources. It's just a great way for me to connect with you. So if you're interested in doing that, please subscribe. I think you'll enjoy it. Well, it's winter here in Washington State. Other parts of the world, it's summer and so on. But here in Washington, we're in the winter period where things really slow down. The weather cools off, get quite a bit of rain, so it's not a great boating time. But now we're kind of on the upswing. I enjoy this time of year when we kind of move into spring and the weather starts improving, the days get longer, and you get excited about being back on the water again. So I'm looking forward to that. With the new year especially, it's pretty cool. So anyway, next we're going to move on to the interview with Eric Hvalsoe, Hvalsoe Boats. I recorded this about 2 weeks ago with Eric, met at his shop and his home and had a great time. So here we go. Roll the interview with Eric. Okay, it's December 27, 2013. I am sitting with Eric Hvalsoe of Shoreline, Washington. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for coming up.
Yeah. So we've been out in Eric's shop looking at some of his boats. We're just going to jump right in here, Eric. Tell me about your youth and where you grew up and if you did any boating.
Well, I'm from the area, strangely enough. I grew up on the east side of Lake Washington. I grew up on the water in a boating family. So I was sailing and really started sailing probably in junior high. Really got the bug in junior high and grew up cruising and boating with my family in the San Juan's Gulf Islands, and was always really interested in boat design from as long as I can remember. As far back as I can remember, I was really, really interested in design.
Let me ask you a couple of questions
Yeah.
about your. What kind of boats did you grow up on sailing and using with your family and so on?
The sailboat that I grew up with and really cut my teeth on was an O'Day day sailor, a 17-foot day sailor.
Oh,
which I still think is a wonderful boat, and which once in a long while one appears on the market.
is that a sloop rig?
Yep, just a conventional, modern glass hull sloop rig, but probably with. I've always heard that Uffa Fox was involved with George O'Day in the development of that design. So I think it's the O'Day day sailor was one of the early planing or semi-planing commercial designs. So that's, but I also, when in junior high school, I took sailing lessons at Leschi and.
Oh, you did? Did you sail Sea Larks?
Yes.
Because I had a Sea Lark for a while that I had at Leschi.
That's
was in
right.
the 80s.
Sea Larks at Leschi. That's right. Yeah.
14-foot sloop.
Yep. Yeah. That's right. I took lessons on Sea Larks and, lasers and so little bits of this and that. But the family boat was an O'Day day sailor, and we always had a runabout. Glastron runabout, and so that's what we had on the lake. And the cruising, family cruising, we would charter, like a 32-foot cabin cruiser usually.
Oh, wow.
And go up for a couple of weeks, whatever. Did some small boat. Went as far as Princess Louisa a couple years, I think, in the 17-foot runabout. When I was probably 8 or 9 years old.
In a 17-foot runabout, you went to Princess Louisa?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness!
And I have a very vivid memory of being caught in a pretty intense squall or storm or something like that, where it felt like the boat was going to sink. It seemed like the boat was half submerged as much as anything else. It's a very vivid childhood memory.
Yeah, because
it was pretty bad, actually.
Pretty open water on the
Yeah.
way up there, even though it's the inside passage, most of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I grew up around boats, and I grew up boating.
So when did you get introduced to wooden boats?
Yeah, so I didn't really grow up with wood boats, but I grew up with an interest in an interest and an eye, I would say, for boats. And I got away from that a little bit in high school or immediate post-high school, did some traveling. But when I came back from my travels, I went back to college for a while, and then I started thinking again about boat-related activities and more in terms of design again. And I thought again about getting back to my original interest in design. So at some point in all of that, I had put my name on waiting lists for the local boat building schools, which at that time was Seattle Community College and L.H. Bates, Voc Tech in Tacoma. I think that the Port Townsend School was just getting started, perhaps. That was a little less on my radar screen and a little further away. So I think I stayed in college a while, but I put my name on the waiting list for these programs, and eventually, when my name came up, I decided to go to Bates. Not because I really thought I was a carpenter, but because I thought it would be a good background, perhaps for eventually finishing a formal education and going into design work.
Boat design?
Boat design work.
Mm-hmm.
But what really happened, I think, was I went to boat building school, 2-year program, and I had a chance to design and build a boat for a client while I was at school, and that was the Hvalsoe 13. And I think I discovered that I had an affinity for boat carpentry, for woodworking, for that kind of work, and I got out. It was the early 80s. I was in school, I think 80, 81. And I found some satisfaction in that, and I started working, like a lot of students, I started working on side jobs while I was in boat building school. And I designed the 13 when I was there and built the first one for a client. To be honest, I just started working on boats, and I kept working on boats. Finished school, and I'd started working for myself, and I just kept doing that.
So were you building boats or repairing boats?
It's mostly repairing boats. Mostly repairing boats. There's always been some design work, but I really just started working in this field and kept going. So almost always self-employed, with just a couple of short breaks, exceptions. I've been self-employed for 35 years.
Cool. So your first boat, the Hvalsoe 13, describe that boat for us.
So that is it's a round bottom, I guess I'll call it a dinghy. When I was in school, a fellow named Jerry Brown, who's a tugboat skipper, approached me and asked me to design a small rowing and sailing boat for him. And it kind of started with a napkin sketch on his part. So he wanted a boat that had some overhangs, a curving stem and a raking transom, and he wanted a transom stern boat. So that was part of the inception of the design, and then from there I just created a shape that I thought would be a good combination rowing and sailing dinghy for him. So that was the first one way back then, and I've built a number of them since for clients.
And that's a lapstrake boat.
It's a lapstrake boat. So that was and still I've only done them traditional lapstrake. So red cedar planking, oak ribs, traditionally clench nailed. It's got, I'd call it more of a heart-shaped transom, not so much a wine glass, but kind of a nice buoyant but elegant heart-shaped transom. The 13 it's 4.5 feet wide, so it's relatively beamy and stable for its length, and it's just a real sweet little rowing and sailing boat.
Can that be rowed from 2 stations?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's got 2 rowing stations.
It has 2 rowing stations, so it trims best with a passenger in the stern and a rower in the forward station.
Mm-hmm. And then what kind of sail rig does that have?
You know, it has a sprit rig, but I think it would be a nice boat with a standing lug, and that's maybe one of the things I'll do is draw a standing lug rig for it.
Is it an unstayed mast on that boat?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Cool. So what was the transition from that boat to your next design then, Eric?
Yeah, so
take us through the steps of the other boats you've designed.
Right. So there's kind of over the years this sort of been a series developed of boats that began with that 13 footer. I built a handful of the 13s in the succeeding years after trade school, and then at some point, well, probably in the mid-1980s, somebody asked me to build a little bit bigger boat for them. So I essentially stretched, refared on paper, but essentially stretched the 13 to a little bit longer to actually to about 15 foot 9 inches. Using the same midsection, essentially the same profile, but a longer boat. So a little bit bigger, longer boat for oar and sail, transom stern boat for oar and sail. Still built traditionally, cedar on oak lapstrake. And I built a handful of those for folks. And actually there is both now in the livery of the Center for Wooden Boats on Lake Union in Seattle, there is both a 13 and a 15 that are in the rental fleet, so you can actually use those boats at the center. And then, sometime about late 90s or 2000, when I had another commission for the bigger boat, quote unquote, the 15, I took the opportunity to do some tweaks on that design, basically just by eye, filling out some of the sections. So I made a little bit more buoyant boat, but it was same backbone, same midsection, and just filling that boat out a little bit in the ends. And I chose to call that the 16. It's almost 16 feet, 15 foot 9 inches. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it's just a little bit of a little different iteration. So that's the 16, and I've built a few of those as well. And I've sold plans, and there's been a few of those 16s, as well as the 13s, built by other folks over the years. And I'm currently working on designs for 18 and 19 feet of the same family. The design goal is a boat that is really a nice boat for rowing or sailing, and not so much hanging an outboard. It would not be a big consideration, but a boat that is pretty comfortable to both row and sail, and that's an interesting challenge, interesting design challenge.
Yeah, so what are the trade-offs? I'm just curious, in designing a boat, what are the trade-offs between sail and row that you have to kind of balance? What characteristics?
Well, minimum for rowing, I guess minimum, real bare bones, minimum wetted surface is a nice thing for rowing. A rowboat's going to be fine-ended. Whether it's a transom stern or a double ender, it's going to be fine-ended on the waterline, and that's a gradient, where the boat falls in terms of the lines in the design. So, I think a good compromise is a boat that is that is relatively fine-ended, and so rows easily without an excessive amount of wetted surface, or an excessive amount of buoyancy, really. But buoyancy is also a matter of sailing stability and load carrying capacity. So I think a real hardcore rowing boat would be narrow and a little tender and real fine-ended. But I don't think that necessarily makes a good boat, depending on what you want to do with it. If you're going to be sailing, and just for general comfort, I like the idea of having a little bit wider boat than might be optimum for rowing, just for general comfort and stability, and feeling good moving around in the boat. And my interest is not just flat water boats. My interest is camp cruising, so something that can be out in some boisterous conditions. Sailing, stability requirements for sailing is a little more associated with more beam. It's kind of a circle that keeps growing. If you want more sail, you need more beam and more buoyancy and more capacity. But I don't want to go too far along that spectrum. I want to still keep it a boat that rows easily, meaning just the horsepower of one rower or maybe two. It's got to move easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and then it's just got to be pretty. It's just got to be pretty and attractive, and it's got to be pretty attractive, seaworthy, comfortable, and safe. Just all those things.
Okay, so that's what sounds like. That's probably what makes your boat unique, because it has those characteristics and it sails and rows well.
Yeah,
and you've made a good balance of all those.
I think
that's kind of your goal.
Yeah, right. I think that's this is kind of a line from the 13, 15, 16 to the next iteration, which will be 18 or 19 feet. Those are all boats that will row or sail nicely, and I think are all recognizable as a Hvalsoe.
Yeah. What kind of a sailing rig will you put on the bigger boat, the 18 or 19?
Well, I've become, after being kind of stuck on sprit sails for a long time, I've expanded into lug sails and expanded into the idea of the lug yawl configuration. So my own boat, I have one of my 16 footers, It's a boat that bandwagon. It's a bandwagon was built for a client in the year 2000, and I had a chance to bring that boat back here because the original client had to move away and had to find a new home. So I have that boat back, and I've been able to use it and play with it and camp cruise with it and really learn a lot more about my own boats and my own designs that way. It's really good. I think if you're thinking of buying a boat from a builder or whatever, it's nice if the builder actually has experience.
Yeah.
Serious experience with that with that boat that he's building.
Yeah.
I mean, on the water experience.
So tell me about some of the trips you've made in this boat, bandwagon.
So bandwagon, I got the boat back from the original owner. It was I think it was a great deal for both of us, and it still had the sprit sail. And I did some overnighters around Puget Sound and in the San Juans. That was a lot of fun. Did some early adventures with the folks from Center for Wooden Boats and some buddies. And some of my friends were really starting to explore the lug rig and lug yawl rigs, and it's been 2 or 3 years now, I guess. I went ahead and did the transition of my own boat from the original sprit sail to a lug yawl, to a balanced lug yawl. So the balanced lug sail uses the boom, and
so the forepart of the sail is ahead of the mast.
Right.
Is that right?
Right. So the balanced lug, the luff is entirely forward of the mast, and there is a boom. There are other lug variations where there may not be a boom, but the balanced lug, a portion of that sail, it varies a lot, but say maybe 20% of the sail is forward of the mast, just as a rough 20 to 30%. So I made that change, and it's a great rig for solo camp cruising, I think. And with that new rig, I did some more adventurous trips. We went to Barkley Sound for a week and a half. Myself, actually, there were four of us. Myself and some buddies, 4 small traditional boats, and we cruised in Barkley Sound for a week and a half. It was a great trip.
Where'd you guys launch from?
We launched from Tocart Bay, which I heard may be closed actually now. But Tocart Bay is all the way in the back of Barkley Sound. I'd also kayaked out of Tocart Bay a couple times over the years, and it made a lot of sense because you can start at Tocart Bay and you're very protected, and you can sort of progressively, in short hops, make your way out into the Broken Group. The Broken Islands is the group of islands, which is a provincial park in the middle of Barkley Sound. So you could launch at Tocart and make your way out in kind of small bites, and it's a great place. It still is a great place. I think you may have to investigate some other launching locations now.
Yeah,
I think Tocart Bay is closed. So we did that, and we had 3 lug yawls and another rig, which was kind of a lug catch. And last year, this year, 2013, myself and a couple of my buddies, Tim and James, we put in an Olympia, with our small boats and did Olympia to Port Townsend. So we took the boats from Olympia to Port Townsend as a precursor to the festival. That's how we got to the festival.
Oh, fun.
The Port Townsend Festival this year.
Really?
By
Okay. So you
sailing and
had your
rowing
boat
from-
there at the festival?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we were
I
in the
was there.
water.
I wish
Yeah.
No. Very cool. Eric, you've designed some other boats too, right? Some power boats?
Yeah, I've
Tell
done
me
some.
about those.
Well, I've done a couple interesting powerboat projects in the in the mid '80s, in the mid 1980s, mid to late 1980s, I was approached by an acquaintance who was a classic runabout hydroplane nut, very, very interested in those kinds of boats. And he commissioned me to build a John Hacker design from an old rudder magazine, which was called Zipper. He found this John Hacker design in an old rudder magazine from the early or mid 30s. It was called Zipper, and about 18 feet, just a little guy. 18 feet, and I took that and built it, figured out a very different kind of way to build it than the original plans, and also designed a different coaming and cockpit configuration than the plan showed. And that boat was eventually named Little Miss Canada 4 because apparently the owner, my client, the owner, felt that it was very close to a historic Hacker design called Little Miss Canada 4. So I built that boat for Ken.
What length boat was that?
It was only 18 feet. And I think it was, I think at that time, that was the beginning. Right about that time, there was a growing interest in gentlemen's race boats, runabouts. I think it was just sort of a timing thing. And I built that boat. It took on this identity as Little Miss Canada 4, and it got around. It did quite a bit of touring. I went to Lake Tahoe for the big show down there, and it went back east for different events, and seemed to create a little bit of a stir. And I think it was part of an interest at that time in these gentlemen's race boats, runabouts. And a little bit later, I built, actually on spec, I did a boat called Aurora. So I took the Zipper, the Little Miss Canada 4 boat, using that as an inspiration, or using what I would say a Hacker hull form from Zipper. I drew a little bit bigger boat, about 21 feet, and I used what I learned from the Little Miss Canada boat, and so I designed a new boat using Hacker's general form, and I called that boat Aurora. And that boat was on the cover of Wooden Boat magazine, and was featured, quite a lengthy article, featured in about 1990, I believe, Wooden Boat magazine. Wooden Boat number 102, I remember that. It was 90 or 91. And a lot of people, it was a very, very radical.
A lot of tumble home in the stern, and
Well, it didn't. Well, it had a lot of. It actually didn't have tumble home, but it had a very. Aurora has very low shear line, that sweeps down to a very small transom, but it's got a highly cambered deck, highly radius cambered deck, and it's got this really racy looking kind of combing configuration.
It's a mahogany varnish boat.
Yeah, it was all varnished, except for the bottom was painted, but it was an all varnished boat.
Cold molded construction.
Yeah, I would call it cold molded. It was the construction method was sawn frames, but sort of cutaway sawn frames with bottom stringers and also deck stringers and a molded plywood bottom, so 2 or 3 layers molded plywood bottom. The aft, it was also it's a stepped boat, single step boat, which that's what they called a hydroplane in the 1930s. It had the bottom steps up. So it had a number of interesting features. And it was an epoxy boat, so the bottom 3 layers molded plywood forward, 2 layers aft, and then everything else. The sides were mahogany over plywood, and the on the deck was longitudinal laid mahogany over diagonally laid plywood, and with a lot of stringers. So it's actually. It was rather akin to earlier stringer and frame aircraft construction. I would almost associate it with.
Yeah. Where's that boat today, Eric?
I'm not exactly sure. The last I knew of it, it was owned by a nice couple from Eastern Washington who had a resort on a lake in Alaska, and they had an exotic collection of boats up there. I think powerboat, runabout type boats, and Aurora was up there on a lake in Alaska. That was several years ago. I'm not sure where it is right now.
Mm-hmm. And how about Little Miss Canada? Do you know where that is?
Last time I heard a few years ago was in California.
You need to put GPS tracking on these boats here.
Yeah. I would like. Well, Aurora, I'd especially like to. I'd love to see Aurora again, just to see how it's holding up and see how the structural elements are doing. There's a lot of unusual elements in that boat.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a kind of. Really caught up a lot of people's imaginations. People that are into that kind of boat. It was the kind of boat that if you were motoring around in it on the lake, you would get. It's the kind of boat that some people wouldn't register at all, but other people would just be. There'd just be an instant reaction, like people would just break out in a big old smile and give you a thumbs up and just react very strongly to it. So you got the lapstrake rowing and sailing boats and these power boats that I did.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So it's kind of strange. Some people know those, some people know those, and some other people.
Is anybody building the Hvalsoe boats, your designs, with glued plywood lapstrake construction versus traditional?
Yes. So, so glued plywood is sort of become the way of the world. This is a change that's taken place over 30, 35 years. When I started, that really wasn't around much. There is a gentleman in Vermont right now who's building an HV13 in glued ply lapstrake, and there's a great thread about it on the Wooden Boat Forum. and he's doing a great job. And I'll probably build it that way one of these days too. So yeah, that's an interesting discussion in itself about boat building methods. The predominance of glued ply lapstrake. I think it is predominant now. The traditional plank on frame is certainly well. I think the plywood lapstrake is particularly better suited to the home builder, perhaps, or the amateur builder. I think there's a long list of pros or cons or positives or negatives, but glued plywood lapstrake is very much here and very, very much a part of how boats are built now, and has a lot of great advantages, good elements to it.
Yeah.
So far, there's a 13 going.
You want to pause here for a second?
Sure, that's my answer.
Okay, we're back. So we were talking about glued plywood lapstrake construction. I'm curious, for your boat, somebody wanted to build one of your boats, would you say a beginning builder could build one, intermediate, advanced, as far as skill level to build a boat? What would you say? I know that's kind of a difficult question.
Yeah, I think that it's certainly more of an undertaking than a simple flat bottom sheet panel boat. I mean, these boats we're talking about, this series, 13, 16, the 18 or 19, these are all round bottom boats, round bottom designs. So that's my boats. These boats have always been 8 or actually 9 or 10 strakes.
Okay.
So I think round bottom designs I always call them the Cadillac of boat types. But it's more of an undertaking. That's part of the reward and part of the work of building what can be a more elegant form than a flat bottom or slab-sided boat. It's not to say that I'm not saying that one boat is better.
Yeah.
They're just different. There's different
more elegant
levels of sophistication and elegance, and that is not exactly the same thing as practical function.
Are these boats built over molds on a strong back type of thing? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, lapstrake is typically built over molds, and the shell is planked first. Now, with glued plywood lapstrake, in most cases, people are eliminating the ribs altogether. That's really one of the advantages to that construction method, is that you don't need to bend in ribs for it. It's just all the glued shell, sometimes with floor timber elements or some bulkhead elements. But the traditional boats, they're still planked up usually. They're still planked up upside down over molds. I tend to build small boats upside down, and they would be ribbed out afterwards.
Ribs steam bent in place after the hole's built.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. What tips or advice would you have for first-time or beginning boat builder, Eric? Any just basic stuff you would say?
Well, the wooden boat, there's an awful lot of information on the wooden boat forum. I just introduced myself to that. Well, I started paying attention to the forum when one of my boats came up on it, and people were asking about it. So there's an awful lot of information there. Maybe next boat building class I have scheduled, I'd love to promote it maybe while on my website. The Center for Wooden Boats, we might talk about scheduling another boat building class next year.
Okay.
There's some good books out there. There are. What's changed over 30 years? There really are more resources for the home builder now than there were 30 years ago. There's a lot more choice there's a lot more plans available. There's some pretty thorough packages out there available for the amateur builder. So I think it's there's more choices, and it's not as daunting as it once was.
Well, it's sure nice to have the internet to log into and have all the resources at your fingertips from while you're sitting in your jammies having your coffee.
Yeah, it really, it really is. And I think the Center for Wooden Boats does some workshops at Tacoma Beach. There's the school in Port Townsend, although there are boat building activities at the Maritime Heritage Center in Port Townsend.
Northwest Maritime Center.
Northwest Maritime Center.
Yeah.
There's a lot more possibilities.
Okay, cool. So, Eric, let's finish up here with you. For people that are listening that are interested in your boats, maybe building one, buying plans, having you build one, or having you repair one of their boats, give us your plug for your business here.
Yeah. Well, I want to open it up a little bit in terms of what my business is, because it's not just building boats. It's actually building boats is an occasional thing. I tell people that if it's wood, paint, or varnish, I do it. So I am like most other guys or gals working on boats. A lot of my work is repair, restoration, refurbishing. Most of my work is on boats, on wooden boats, but there's a very broad range of activities there. So it's paint, varnish, repair, restoration, wood boats, wood hulls. It may be woodwork, cabinet work, occasionally on bigger glass boats, but interior work, and I do some residential work. Occasionally do residential cabinet, furniture work. I do sell plans for 13, 16, and I'll have developing some new designs that'll be available. I would love to. I love building new boats. That's something that just doesn't come up as often as all this other kind of work.
Yeah,
you got to be flexible and you got to cover a lot of bases.
Well, what's your contact information?
So my email is HVALSOBOAT@msn.com. And I have a website, which is hvalsoe-boats.com. And the number here is 206-533-9138.
Okay.
And if you just know my name, you can always just Google me.
And Hvalsoe is spelled HVALSOE. SOE.
Right.
Okay.
So I'll go over that. So my name is spelled Eric, E-R-I-C. The last name is H, V as in Victor, A-L-S-O-E.
Is that Scandinavian?
It's Danish.
Oh, it's Danish. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. And I was going to ask how much the plant sets cost, Eric, if you don't mind disclosing that. We're not going to hold you to anything.
Yeah. Depending on there's some depending on the exact set or configuration, between $100 and $150.
Okay.
I have some full-size patterning that goes with the 13, or the option of some full-size patterns that go with the 13. The 16 has some full-size patterns, but still requires lofting.
So you have a table of offsets?
Yeah, the 16. So, for example, the 16 package is a table of offsets, a construction drawing, a couple of sail plans, either for the sprit sail or the basic sail plan for a lug yawl, a sheet of larger construction details, and some line-off information. Yeah, I think that's it, right?
Okay, very good. Well, I really appreciate you being on the podcast today, Eric. Anything else you'd like to add here? Any comments or anything at the end?
There's so many things I could think of when you asked me to chat and visit. There's a million things I thought of, but because it's been 35 years.
Yeah.
But we probably covered a lot of what might be of interest, hopefully, to your listeners.
Very good. Well, thanks a lot, Eric. We'll be talking soon.
Thank you very much.
Okay, take care.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Eric, thanks for taking the time to meet with me and have a little bit of fun with some boats, and I wish you the best in all your endeavors with your new design you're working on and boats you're building and working on. It's pretty cool, and you've got a really cool shop there. That's awesome. So good luck to you. Okay, that's about it for this week. I did want to mention you can connect with me by email, dan@hookedonwoodenboats.com. You can leave a voice message from your computer for me. If you go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/voicemail, you can leave a message up to 90 seconds there. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube. I've got 10 or so videos on YouTube, and in those places you can find me by looking for Wooden Boat Dan. So I would encourage you to do that and connect with me when you get a chance. So I hope you have a great week. Keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. Wooden Boat Dan, over and out. God bless. Have a great week.